Hello everyone, and welcome to the 6th in our webinar series of wellbeing webinars for staff working in the European Society of Paediatric and Neonatal Intensive Care. We're really glad that you've come, and this one is all about supporting your team. It's relevant if you're a manager or a team leader, if you're a consultant, or also if you're a member of a team and you want to think about how you support your team better. So I'm going to share my slides. I'm Dr. Ellie Atkins. I'm a paediatric clinical psychologist. I work at St George's Hospital in London in the UK in paediatric intensive care and a little bit in the neonatal intensive care unit. Now, I want to start by thinking about why we should even support our team. I don't know how well this word is going to translate, but I think the word fluffy is this idea that thinking about our team's well-being is just this extra add-on. We're dealing with critically ill people and we need to get the medicine right, and the other stuff, well, it's just not so important. And I'm going to argue to you that it actually is just as important. There is a lot of evidence about people, and in particular hospital staff, and we're gathering a body of evidence about this, about how people respond to critical incidents. And it isn't always what you would expect. It isn't that everybody is vastly traumatised, but there is an impact of these incidents on people. And we know that coping with difficult events and being resilient is down to what happens in teams. The key thing about whether people manage or not is about the team that they're in, and there's an evidence base for that. So this webinar is going to cover the research about what matters most to staff and how you can support your teams. But there are some things I'm not thinking about because they're not kind of psychology-led things, but they're just as important, and I would really encourage you to be thinking about the following things. Thinking about skill mix on your unit, about shift patterns. By that I mean how many nights and days people do, whether people do long days or short days, about the break times and protecting those, about staff training, communication from both the management of your hospital and from the individual team leaders about the changes and about the challenges that are being faced, and feeling well supported by your managers, the wider unit and your hospital. Those are all really important things. And I think if you felt like you wanted to do one thing about wellbeing, I would encourage you to look at that list first, because I think those are the things that have a real impact on wellbeing. But the things I'm going to talk about will also have a positive impact on staff and make your team a more resilient place, and that makes our work better. And we know that teams that don't work well together have poorer outcomes, and I'm talking about things like mortality. So this is not something to not pay attention to. Actually, it makes a critical difference to our patients, but also putting ourselves and thinking about ourselves and our team is really important for us and for the people in your teams. So these are the things that we know make a difference to staff. And the first one is having the right information, because that helps staff to be prepared for what they might face. So if you're in a team, or particularly if you're a manager, these are the things that you can do. The first thing is you need to gather the information in order to brief your team appropriately. So you need to ask some tricky questions. You might need to go to your managers or to staff higher up in the trust in your hospital, and you might need to ask them about what's happening. And you might sometimes need to ask some difficult questions, or the questions that nobody's asking, because you need to give your team the information they need to do their job, including the challenges. I think we sometimes feel that we should talk about the positive things and not talk about the things that are difficult. And I would encourage you to talk about both, not to dwell on either one of those, but to talk about both and give them equal attention. And if you don't know, tell your staff you don't know, but make an effort to find out. And be honest about the challenges, because if you're naming them, that makes it easier for staff to name them. If they talk about them, you can tackle what's challenging. Another thing that makes a real difference to staff is getting support from more experienced colleagues. And one of the things that's been happening during this pandemic is very inexperienced colleagues have come very quickly to working in very difficult jobs. So in the UK, we had some doctors who were near the end of their undergraduate training programme, who were accelerated through and finished a few months earlier than they would have expected to. So they would have had this buffer of a few extra months, time to kind of get their head in the right place, and instead they're on the job quicker. or there are people who had trained in one specialty who are working in another specialty. So it's really, really important that staff get support from others. It's easy really to focus on tasks, but let's get a focus on support as well. So have in mind that staff wellbeing is important. Offer support to people. Find out what is available in your hospital, where staff could go if they need something. If people are struggling, stand by them. What they need for you to do is to be a safe pair of hands. Or if you attended my webinar on stress, you'll know that we talk about stress like we've got a bucket and our bucket gets fuller. If you're a manager or a team leader, your team need to be able to tip a bit of their bucket into your bucket. That lowers their stress level. Now it does raise yours, so then you need to pay attention to some of the other webinars that I've done about how you empty your stress bucket, but allow staff members to sometimes pass some of that stuff over to you. Acknowledge the challenges and acknowledge the impact that it's having on people. And apologising for, I'm sorry you've had such a tough shift, is not you saying that you've done something wrong. It's just a way of acknowledging this is what's happening. But if you're going to do that, you need to look after yourself. If you're going to allow people to tip into your bucket or to stand by them when they're having a hard time, you need to look after yourself, because firstly, because it's important for you, but secondly, because if you don't have the capacity to support your team. So use your more experienced colleagues, use your peers and your seniors to get support as you need it. Teams coping with stress use peer support and social support. So they don't just need the more experienced colleagues, they need the people around them as well. So take the time to get to know your team, encourage them to find support in others, encourage them to be talking to each other, possibly outside of work, or that they find other support outside of work. Talk to them, laugh and cry with them, be human with them. And if you're able to model that it's okay sometimes to find things hard and talk about things, then people will understand that that's okay too. And as a manager or a team leader, that you're walking a very tricky line, because you both need to model that it's okay to find things hard and be talking about some of the challenges without making it seem like you're not coping and therefore your staff need to protect you. So you do have to manage that line very carefully, and the way you do that is by making sure you're getting your own support. So you're not using your team to support you, you're talking about challenges in order to support them. And you need to keep in touch with other people, people who you were in touch with pre-pandemic, the people who are really supportive. So for me, that might be the people that I did my doctoral training with. They're people who are also psychologists, understand the kinds of challenges that we're facing. They were really helpful when we were in the middle of our first peak. I found them really helpful to talk to. One of the teams I missed the most was my football team. I play in a football team, and I really missed them. We weren't able to meet up when we were in lockdown, but I was able to keep in touch with them via WhatsApp. So encourage your team to be keeping in touch with other people. People inside and outside work is helpful because that gives you a balance. Sometimes you need people who know what you're going through and who you don't have to explain or you don't have to worry about confidentiality with. And then you need people outside of work you can talk about other stuff that's completely different. You need to help your staff to understand that it's okay to find things hard. But don't underestimate that people are resilient and they do cope with stressful situations. And most people, the evidence base is suggesting to us that most people will come out of this. They might need a little bit of extra support, or they might be fine, but they will still find it hard in the middle of this. And we know, for example, some of the papers coming out of China after their lockdown were suggesting that healthcare staff were finding it harder to sleep in the middle of the pandemic. And maybe they were finding it hard to talk to people who weren't in their setting, but actually their mental health was, for most people, was okay afterwards. If that's not true for all people, some people will need additional help. And then you as a manager might need to find out, where is that additional help available? Is it within the hospital? Is there something in the community? Is there a group that the hospital's running, or somewhere that they can kind of connect up and talk about how they're feeling? But in order to help staff to manage the things that are hard, think about encouraging them to think about their well-being. Maybe watching these webinars is a good first step. Protecting break time to make sure people are eating and drinking. Think about your really basic needs. Look at the shift patterns. Make sure there's enough time for sleep and enough time to see your families. And then if somebody needs extra support, find the services that are available. So this is the last in our series of mini webinars. Please do look at the other ones, particularly if you're thinking about how you support yourself in order that you're available to support your team. If you have any questions, either you or you might encourage your team to send questions to us. We're going to do an interactive session at the end of this run of webinars, and we'd be really interested to hear what you'd like us to talk about. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for listening. If you followed the whole webinar series, then very well done, and thank you for sticking with us. I hope that you find ways to look after yourself and that you take care through this. And I think it's really important to say at the end of this that wellbeing is not just about COVID. All of the things that I'm talking about are just as relevant, particularly to the population of paediatric and neonatal intensive care staff, because the nature of our work means it's always difficult and stressful. And so I would encourage you to be thinking about wellbeing all of the time. This isn't just an add-on for COVID. This is if we want to do our jobs well, these are things we need to pay attention to. Thank you for listening very much. Take care. Bye-bye.